Everyone warns you about heartbreak, but no one tells you how terrifying it is when the person you love starts disappearing while they're still right beside you. I still remember the exact morning when I realized something had shifted between us, even though nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting, no slammed doors, no accusations hanging in the air. Just a kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace anymore, but tension so thin it almost hummed. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, scrolling on her phone the way she always did, but the space between us felt unfamiliar, as if someone had taken our old life and nudged it just an inch out of alignment. Most people wouldn't have noticed a difference. But I did. I noticed everything. For a long time, I tried to convince myself it was just a bad week, maybe work stress or exhaustion or the weather or anything else that didn't force me to admit we were drifting. I told myself couples go through phases. That silence isn't always a warning. But the truth was, I felt it in my bones, that subtle emotional distance, the way her eyes didn't linger on mine the way they used to, how our conversations had shrunk into short, functional exchanges that told me nothing about what she really felt. We still lived together, slept beside each other, went through the motions of a normal relationship. But the connection, the easy closeness we once had, was fading quietly, like breath on glass. I didn't know how to fix something I couldn't define, so I went through each day hoping it was just in my head. But every night the silence grew heavier. We'd watch something on TV, both staring forward like two people sharing a waiting room instead of a life. She'd laugh occasionally, but it was the careful kind, the one that didn't reach her eyes. And every time I looked at her, I felt this quiet panic simmer in my chest, because I didn't know how to ask if she was slipping away from me without sounding insecure. One evening, she came home later than usual. No explanation, just a tired smile that looked more like an apology she wasn't ready to offer. I asked how her day was, and she said long in a tone that closed the conversation before it even began. When she walked past me into the bedroom, I stayed on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd been standing, wondering when exactly it had become normal to feel alone when she was still in the same room. I started noticing the small changes. How she no longer greeted me with that warm spark she used to have. How her hugs felt shorter, almost polite. How she didn't rest her head on my shoulder during movies anymore. How she started keeping her phone face down on the table, not suspiciously, just habitually, like she didn't want me glancing at whatever was on the screen. These things weren't smoking guns. Just tiny, everyday details. But they added up in my mind, forming a quiet dread that I couldn't shake. Some nights she fell asleep before I even got into bed, turned away from me, curled tight as if trying to stay small. Other nights she stayed awake long after I'd closed my eyes, the soft glow of her phone casting shifting shadows on the walls. I never asked what she was reading or who she was talking to because I was afraid of the answer. Or maybe I was afraid that the answer wouldn't be anything dramatic, that it would simply be that she didn't feel connected to me anymore. The hardest part was realizing how quickly distance becomes a habit. We stopped checking in on each other in those small, quiet ways couples usually do. No, how are you really? No, what's wrong? No reaching for the other's hand at random moments. We became polite. Gentle. Careful. And careful love is usually already halfway gone. Every morning, I woke before her and lay still, listening to her breathing. I watched the early light touch her face, tracing the features I used to know so well, and wondered why it suddenly hurt to look at her. I wondered whether she felt the same ache, or if the separation was mostly in my mind. I wondered whether she was waking up hoping things were better, or simply hoping they wouldn't get worse. But the thing that scared me most wasn't losing her. It was the idea that maybe she was still here, still trying in her own quiet way, and I was the one who didn't know how to reach her anymore. And somewhere deep down, I realized this. We weren't fighting. We weren't breaking. We were simply fading. And that terrified me more than any argument ever could. The shift between us became harder to ignore once I started noticing how every small moment felt slightly off, like a picture frame hanging just a bit crooked on the wall. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just a collection of tiny mismatches that slowly built into something heavier than either of us dared to acknowledge. It wasn't the kind of tension you could point at and say, "Here, this is where everything went wrong." It was quieter, almost tactical in the way it settled into the cracks between us. The kind of tension that makes you question your own judgment before you question the relationship itself. It began with simple things, the kind you only notice when you're looking for reassurance and instead find absence. She stopped saying goodnight the way she used to, with that soft lingering smile and a half-playful comment about stealing the blankets. Now she just turned off the light, lay down beside me, and murmured something that barely counted as a word. Sometimes I wasn't even sure if she was talking to me or just exhaling. In the mornings, she used to brush her fingers along my arm to wake me gently. Now she slipped out of bed without a sound, like she was afraid to disturb me, or afraid to be seen. Our routines didn't change all at once, but the feeling behind them did. We started eating at different times, not because of schedules but because it was easier than forcing conversation. I cooked, she reheated later. She cooked, I wandered in hours afterward. At first, I told myself it was normal, just the ebb and flow of long-term relationships. But the truth was, it felt like we had become two separate orbits drifting further apart with every passing day. One Thursday evening, she came home carrying an exhaustion that didn't match the time she left work. She tossed her bag onto the couch with a sigh that felt heavier than her body. I approached her, reaching out to rest a hand on her back, but she stepped forward at the same moment, unintentionally dodging my touch. The kind of mistake couples make all the time. But something about it hit harder than it should have. "You okay?" I asked quietly. "Yeah, just tired." Same answer as always. Delivered with that soft, practiced smile that told me nothing and everything at the same time. I wanted to ask more, but the words tangled in my throat. I didn't want to seem controlling. I didn't want to push her away. So instead, I swallowed the questions that were screaming to get out and followed her into the kitchen. She pulled out leftovers and leaned against the counter while her food warmed, arms crossed over her chest in a way that made her seem closed off, unreachable. I tried to start a conversation. Something light. Something normal. I mentioned a joke a coworker cracked earlier that day, the kind she usually would have laughed at. She offered a polite smile, the kind you give a stranger who holds open the door. Then she looked down at her feet and exhaled deeply, like even that small effort drained her. Moments like these kept piling up, each one eroding a little more of the certainty I used to feel around her. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked how her day went. The way she seemed distracted around me, always somewhere else in her thoughts. The way she flinched when I said her name, as if catching herself in a place I didn't belong. The worst part was how I started doubting myself. Doubting my worth. Wondering if I had done something wrong and forgotten about it. If I had become boring, predictable, insufficient. I replayed our recent conversations in my mind, searching for something I might have said that cut deeper than I intended, something that had built a wall she was too tired to climb over. One night, she left her jacket on the table, pockets turned out as if she'd rifled through them in a hurry. I found her ID badge from work half sticking out, along with a small slip of paper, just a grocery list, nothing more. But the fact that my heart jumped into my throat before I even looked at it told me more about my own fear than anything else. I hated that I'd reached a point where seeing a loose note or her phone buzzing across the room made my stomach twist. I didn't want to be that person. The anxious one. The suspicious one. The one who looked for damage before anyone had confirmed there was any. But suspicion doesn't always come from a lack of trust. Sometimes it comes from a lack of connection. And ours had been thinning for months. A few days later, after another night where we barely exchanged more than 10 words, I finally gathered the courage to ask something real. Something deeper than the usual daily script we'd been repeating out of habit. Are we okay? I said softly while she folded laundry on the bed. She paused for the smallest fraction of a second, barely enough for anyone else to notice. But for me, it was like my heart cracked a little. She forced a smile that didn't match her eyes. Yeah. Just tired. That word again. Tired. It had become a shield between us. I wanted to press. I wanted to ask what she was tired of. Work? Life? Me? But instead, I swallowed the question. She finished folding the laundry and left the room quietly, leaving me alone with my growing fear. And in that silence, I realized something: this distance wasn't going to heal itself. Because the truth wasn't that she was tired. It was that she was tired of pretending she wasn't hurting. And I was terrified that I was part of the reason why. The night everything finally cracked open didn't arrive with a fight or a dramatic confession. It came quietly, the same way everything else had been unraveling between us. I had spent the day replaying her short answers, her half-formed smiles, the way she moved around me like someone walking through a familiar room in the dark, careful not to bump into anything. I was exhausted from the guessing, from carrying around this unnamed weight that settled deeper into my chest every day. And when she came home that evening, something in her expression told me she was just as tired of pretending as I was. She walked through the door with her shoulders hunched, dropping her bag onto the floor instead of placing it neatly on the chair like she usually did. Her hair was messy in a way that didn't look like wind or weather, but like she had run her hands through it repeatedly on the drive home. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door as if contemplating whether she should walk back out again. You okay? I asked gently, my voice softer than I intended, almost fragile. She nodded, but it was the slow, detached kind of nod someone gives when there's no point lying, yet they're too overwhelmed to explain the truth. She walked past me into the kitchen, not touching me, not even grazing my arm the way she used to out of habit. I followed her quietly, leaning against the counter while she poured herself a glass of water. She held it for a moment without drinking, her fingers tightening around the rim like she needed something to anchor herself. I watched her carefully, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to break whatever fragile thought she was holding together. Can I ask you something? I said finally. She didn't look at me, but her shoulders tensed. Yeah, she whispered. The question sat heavy on my tongue. I'd rehearsed it 100 times in my mind, in the shower, while lying awake at night, while sitting in the car before going inside. But speaking it out loud felt like walking barefoot onto broken glass. Are you unhappy with me? I asked quietly. The room went still. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and her slow, unsteady breathing. She didn't answer right away, and the silence felt like a verdict all on its own. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I almost told her to forget it. I almost said I didn't want to know. But I kept my eyes on her, even when it hurt. She finally set the glass down, untouched. Then she leaned against the counter, crossing her arms in that defensive posture she'd been using for months. When she spoke, her voice was soft, too soft. I don't know, she said. It wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't even cold. It was worse. It was honest. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? She looked up at me finally, and the tears gathering in her eyes felt like knives. I don't know if I'm unhappy with you, or unhappy with everything. With myself. With my job. With where I am in life. I don't know if it's us, or me, or both. Her voice trembled on the last word. A part of me felt relieved that she wasn't saying she didn't love me anymore. But another part of me, the insecure, terrified part, felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. Because there's something uniquely painful about being trapped between hope and dread, not knowing which way the truth will lean once it's spoken completely. I moved closer, slowly, like I was approaching a wounded animal. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She let out a shaky breath, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Because I didn't want you to think it was your fault, she whispered. I didn't want you to feel like you had to fix me. I don't want to fix you, I said gently. I just don't want you to feel alone in this. She pressed her lips together, her gaze dropping to the floor. But I do feel alone. Even when you're right next to me. And I hate that. I hate saying that. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to respond, but I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone who feels alone beside you? How do you bridge a distance that neither of you intended to create? We stood there for a long moment, both trapped in the same emotional fog but too afraid to step toward each other. She was the one who broke the silence. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that I'm changing, and you're not. Or that you're changing, and I'm not. Or that we're growing, but not together. I stepped closer, slowly enough to give her time to move away if she needed to. She didn't. I reached out and touched her hand, and she let me. It felt like the first real contact we'd had in weeks. I'm scared too, I said quietly. But I want to understand you. Even if it hurts. I want to know what's going on inside your head. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to drift. I know, I said. Neither of us meant to. We stood like that, holding on to each other gently, like we were both afraid of pressing too hard and breaking something fragile. And in that moment, I realized a painful truth: love doesn't disappear in an instant. It fades through a series of small, unspoken hurts. And if you don't confront them, they grow roots. This was the first time we'd touched those roots. The first time we admitted we were scared. The first time we stopped pretending everything was fine. And it was only the beginning. In the days that followed our conversation in the kitchen, something subtle shifted between us, though not in the way I had hoped. We weren't fighting, but neither were we healing. It was as if every word we spoke came with invisible weight, each glance a silent question, each gesture an attempt to decode the other person's inner world. Nothing felt easy anymore. Even the simplest interactions had a quiet tension, like two people carefully walking across thin ice, afraid the slightest misstep would send them plunging into cold, dark water. I tried to be patient, to give her space without slipping into distance. I cooked dinner, cleaned the apartment, asked how she was feeling, offered small comforts without expecting anything in return. But with every effort, I found myself wondering if I was helping or just filling the silence with noise. She was quieter than ever, and although she appreciated my attempts, at least, that's what her soft nods implied, there was something unreadable in her eyes that made me feel like I wasn't reaching her at all. One evening, after an especially long day at work, she came home looking more drained than I'd ever seen her. Her shoulders slumped, her hair tangled from running her fingers through it all day, her expression distant in a way that made my stomach twist. She dropped her keys onto the counter with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the quiet apartment, then headed straight for the bedroom without a word. I followed her slowly, giving her space but needing to understand what was happening. When I pushed the bedroom door open, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands, her breathing shallow and uneven. My heart tightened. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was something deeper. Something breaking. I approached her carefully, sitting down beside her without touching her. Talk to me, I said gently. Please. She didn't look up. Instead, she shook her head in small, trembling motions, like someone trying to fend off a storm. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a broken whisper. I don't know who I am anymore. The honesty in her words made the room tilt. I swallowed hard, waiting for her to continue. After a few moments, she lifted her face from her hands, revealing eyes full of pain, fear, confusion, emotions she had been burying so deeply that seeing them surface all at once felt like watching a dam crack open. I feel like I'm failing at everything, she said. Work. Life. Us. I'm waking up every day with this heaviness I can't shake, and I don't know how to make it stop. I keep telling myself it's temporary, but it's not going away. And I hate that I pulled away from you. I hate that my own brain feels like it's attacking me. I hate that I can't just be okay. Her voice broke on that last word, and something inside me broke with it. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. She let me hold it, her fingers cold, her grip weak but present. I could feel her trembling, the quiet kind you only notice when you're close enough to feel someone's fear through their skin. You're not failing, I said softly. You're overwhelmed. And you don't have to go through that alone. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, part longing, part despair, part exhaustion. What if I'm dragging you down with me, she whispered. You're not, I said firmly. I'm here because I love you. Not because you're perfect or always okay. I'm here because you're you. Her chin quivered before she looked away, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. I don't know how to fix this, she said. I don't know how to be the version of myself you deserve. My throat tightened. I don't need a version of you, I said quietly. I need you. Whoever that is. However you are. She inhaled sharply, like my words hurt and comforted her at the same time. Then, after a moment, she let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned her head against my shoulder. It felt like the first honest gesture she'd made in weeks. We sat there in silence for what felt like a long time, her tears soaking into my shirt, my hand tracing slow circles on her back. I didn't rush her. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't try to solve anything. I just held her, hoping my presence was enough to keep her from drowning in whatever storm she was fighting internally. Eventually, she sat up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. There's something I haven't told you, she said quietly. My heart clenched. Those words never meant something small. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, then met my eyes with a vulnerability so raw it made my pulse race. I think I'm depressed, she said. There it was, the truth she'd been carrying alone for far too long. The truth that had been eating her from the inside while I stood on the outside, wondering why I couldn't reach her. The truth that explained everything, and changed everything. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about us fading. This was about her fighting a battle I hadn't known existed. And now, whether I liked it or not, we were in it together. After she told me she thought she was depressed, the world didn't suddenly make sense. If anything, it felt more complicated than before. The word hung between us like a fragile truth neither of us knew how to hold yet. I didn't pull away from her. If anything, I held her tighter. But inside, I felt something shift, a mix of fear, determination, helplessness, and a quiet resolve I didn't know I had. Loving someone who's hurting isn't just about being there. It's about trying to understand a pain you can't see. And sometimes can't fix. The next few days felt like walking through an unfamiliar landscape. I watched her closely, not in a suspicious way, but in a terrified one. I studied her pauses, her sighs, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought I wasn't looking. Everything suddenly had meaning. The late nights. The empty stares. The silence. All the moments I once interpreted as distance or disinterest were suddenly recontextualized into something deeper, heavier, more human. I wanted to help. I wanted to fix everything as quickly as possible. I wanted to pull her out of whatever dark place she was sinking into. But I quickly learned that trying to rescue someone from their own mind is like trying to stop the tide with your bare hands. She didn't want me hovering. She didn't want pity. She didn't want solutions. She wanted understanding, and sometimes even that felt like something I wasn't capable of giving perfectly. One evening, I suggested gently that maybe she could talk to someone professionally. A therapist, a counselor, even a doctor. She didn't get angry, but her whole body stiffened, like the suggestion was a spotlight she didn't want shining on her. I know, she said quietly, staring at her hands. I know I should. I'm not there yet. Her voice cracked at the end. I didn't push. I nodded, even though the fear inside me clawed at my ribs. Because sometimes, the worst part of loving someone with depression isn't the sadness, it's the helplessness. Standing on the outside, knowing you can't force them to reach for a lifeline they're not ready to grab. I tried to make life around her easier. I started doing the chores she usually handled. I left little notes for her, nothing overly sentimental, just simple reminders that she mattered, even on her worst days. When she came home looking exhausted, I wrapped her in a blanket and put on her favorite shows, hoping it would make her feel safe. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she went silent. Sometimes she pulled away, and although it stung, I reminded myself it wasn't about me. But the hardest moments were the ones where I could see she was trying, and it still wasn't enough to lift the weight. One night, I found her sitting on the bathroom floor, fully dressed, knees pulled to her chest. Not crying. Not shaking. Just blank. Like she had shut down completely. Like her body was there, but she had stepped out of herself for a moment. When she looked up at me, her eyes were empty in a way I had never seen before. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know why I'm like this. I sat beside her slowly, making sure she didn't feel trapped. You don't have to apologize, I said softly. You're not doing anything wrong. She shook her head. I feel like I'm ruining everything. I feel like I'm dragging you into this mess with me. You're not dragging me, I said, voice cracking. I'm here because I want to be. She leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. I don't even know what I feel anymore. Some days I wake up and everything feels heavy before I even get out of bed. Other days I go through everything like I'm underwater. And I'm tired. I'm so tired. There's a special kind of pain that comes from seeing the person you love suffer in ways you can't prevent. It makes you feel small. Useless. Afraid. But I stayed with her on that cold bathroom floor until she was ready to move. I held her hand loosely, not gripping, not forcing, just enough pressure to let her know she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, though, the emotional strain began to pull at me too. I started feeling the weight of her sadness on my own shoulders. Not in a resentful way, but in a human way. Love makes you absorb someone else's pain, even when you don't mean to. And while I was trying to be strong for her, I began cracking in places I didn't want her to see. There were moments when I sat in the car before going inside, taking deep breaths, telling myself I could be calm and patient and present. Moments where I bit my tongue, afraid to say the wrong thing. Moments where I lay awake at night, terrified of losing her, not because she didn't love me, but because she was losing pieces of herself. And then one evening, after another long, emotionally draining day, she said something that cut deeper than anything before. I don't know if I'm good for you anymore. My heart sank so fast it felt like physical pain. I stepped toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping me gently. I mean it, she said, eyes glassy. I feel like I'm breaking us. And I'm scared that one day you'll resent me for it. I shook my head, throat tight. I won't. You don't know that, she whispered. Maybe she was right. Maybe neither of us knew what the future held. But I knew this, I wasn't leaving. Not because I felt obligated, or trapped, or selfless. But because I loved her, even when she was hurting, even when I was hurting. Because that's what love looks like in the real world. Messy. Imperfect. Hard. And somewhere deep inside me, I hoped she still believed that too. But the truth was, we were both reaching a breaking point. And neither of us knew what would happen if things got worse before they got better. I didn't realize how close we were to breaking until the night everything finally boiled over. Not in a loud way. Not in shouting or accusations or slammed doors. It was quieter than that, almost heartbreakingly gentle, two exhausted people finally reaching the edge of what they could hold alone. The whole day had felt off, a heaviness between us that neither of us addressed. She'd spent most of it in the bedroom, moving slowly, like she was wading through something thick and invisible. I didn't push her. I wanted to give her space. But the truth was, I was terrified that too much space would turn into distance we couldn't undo. That evening, I found her sitting on the floor of the living room, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at a blank spot on the wall. Not crying. Not shaking. Just distant. As if the world around her had dimmed and she couldn't find her way back to it. I sat down beside her carefully, close enough to feel her warmth but far enough not to overwhelm her. Talk to me, I whispered. Please. She didn't look at me. Her voice was flat, tired, worn down. I don't think I'm enough for you. The words punched the air out of my lungs. I shook my head immediately, but she held up her hand, her eyes finally meeting mine, glassy, defeated. I mean it, she said, barely audible. I feel like I'm dragging you into my darkness. I'm afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize you're exhausted too. That loving me feels heavy. That I'm just too much. You're not too much, I said, trying to steady my voice. You're struggling. And I love you enough to stay with you through this. She swallowed hard, tears forming. But what if I never get better? What if this is just who I am now? What if you spend your whole life trying to lift me up when I can't even lift myself? I reached for her hand, expecting her to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly as I wrapped my hand around hers. I'm not here to save you, I said. I'm here to stand beside you. There's a difference. A tear slipped down her cheek, but her expression didn't change. She looked like she was staring through me, not at me. I feel guilty, she said. All the time. I feel like you deserve someone who isn't broken. Someone who can love you the way you love them. My throat tightened. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. She shook her head slowly. Then let me ask you something, she whispered. Are you okay? Really? The question hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to say yes on instinct, but the word got stuck somewhere between my chest and my tongue. Because the truth was, I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time. I was tired. Scared. Worn thin by months of trying to be strong enough for both of us. I felt guilty for feeling that way, guilty for needing support when she was drowning. But the truth was unavoidable, I was hurting too. I'm trying, I admitted. Some days I feel like I'm doing okay. Other days I feel lost. I want to help you, but I don't always know how. And I'm scared sometimes. Not scared of you, scared of losing you. That was when she finally broke. A quiet sob escaped her, and she covered her mouth like she was trying to keep it in. I pulled her into my arms gently, and this time she clung to me like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. We stayed like that for a long time, our breaths uneven, our hearts beating too fast, two people trying desperately not to fall apart entirely. When she finally steadied, she whispered something into my shoulder. I think I need help. Real help. Not just from you. Relief washed over me so intensely it almost hurt. Not because I wanted her to need someone else, but because she finally admitted she couldn't battle this alone. Because she finally chose herself. Because she finally saw what I had seen for months, that wanting help didn't make her weak. It made her brave. We'll find someone, I said softly. A therapist. A doctor. Whoever you need. We'll do it together. She nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. And I want you to take care of yourself too, she whispered. I don't want you to lose yourself in trying to hold me together. I won't, I said, though it wasn't fully true yet. But I knew it could be. We talked for hours, really talked, not the careful, tiptoeing conversations we'd been having for months. We talked about fear. About guilt. About love. About the parts of us we didn't like. About how both of us had been trying so hard to protect the other that we ended up hurting ourselves. And somewhere in that painfully honest conversation, I realized something important. We weren't falling apart because we didn't love each other. We were falling apart because we were trying to love each other in silence. That night, for the first time in months, we fell asleep holding hands, not out of habit or fear, but out of choice. Not because everything was magically fixed. But because we were finally ready to fix it, together.